Sé que estamos un poquito cortos de tiempo, no voy a extender mucho, pero quisiera presentar a Nicholas Barr. Nicholas es Nick es una de las mentes más brillantes y lúcidas del mundo de las pensiones. Ha estado contribuyendo a este debate en las últimas décadas. Es profesor de política pública de la London School of Economics y tiene dos de los grandes libros de referencia del estado de bienestar: The Economics of the Welfare State, que recomiendo encarecidamente, y Pension Reform: A Short Guide. Si alguien se quiere realmente entender cómo reformar estos sistemas, son citas ineludibles. Y sin más, quiero darle la bienvenida a Nick. Nick, thank you very much for joining us. It's a real pleasure to have you. I don't know whether you want to present here or you want to present there. Oh, you come here. Thank you very much, Nick.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Mariano. It's a pleasure to be sharing a platform with Mariano. We've been together, as he said, for many years. Well done, all of you. You're still here. What a rich lot of material you've had thrown at you since Robert Merton's lecture yesterday morning. It's a great pleasure to be part of the Global Pension Programme again. It's also an enormous pleasure to be in Bilbao. This is my first time in the Basque Country, but I very much hope it won't be my last. Now, I've got a very full deck of slides, mainly so that you can take them away and read them afterwards. I'm not going to be able to talk about them in full. I won't even try. I will skip and skim to stick to my time. So let me start off by saying that what I'll be talking about is joint work with Peter Diamond, who is a fellow Nobel laureate of Robert Merton. And I can tell you, writing with a Nobel laureate is a truly terrifying experience. Message to start off with: there is no single best pension system for all countries. I can go through the logic of that in Q&A, but just let me park that as a thought. Let me start off with some wider context. Population's aging. That's got two roots. People are living longer lives, and people are having fewer children. Both of those can be regarded as good news. Longer lives is obviously good news. Women having fewer children is a result, to a significant extent, of women having greater agency, which is itself a good thing, and having fewer children is good for the planet. But population age is poses challenges, and there are at the highest level, two strategic ways of addressing those challenges, which I'm going to be talking about: more and better workers, and more saving and investment. And I'm going to unpack those a little bit. More and better workers by making each individual worker more productive, by investing in the physical capital they use and investing in their human capital, skills, education, training, etc. Increasing the number of workers, well, having more people participating in the labor force at all ages, having a higher age of retirement, a gradually increasing age of retirement. You can import labor through immigration. You can also import labor indirectly by sending capital to countries with a younger population. So that's the first strategic policy direction, how to get more workers. The second one is more saving and investment. And the argument there is a very straightforward one. If women are having fewer children, the future workforce is going to be smaller than it otherwise would be, and a rational response to that is to make each individual member of that smaller workforce more productive through increased investment in human and physical capital. And to that end, higher saving is important, not saving per se, not saving in piles of money, saving that gets translated into productive investment. And I'll come back later to discuss in more detail the policies to increase and improve both labor and capital. I just want to sidetrack briefly to talk about an important lesson from economic theory. And this picks up from what you've heard from several speakers, including Diego. The key point is that the model of choice and competition is oversimple. The simple economic model of competitive markets is useful for all sorts of things. It's brilliant for smartphones and low-cost airlines and automobiles, but markets don't always work well. So why might markets not work efficiently? Well, imperfect information about complex products is one reason. Non-rational behavior that you've heard a lot about during these last two days, search frictions, and then technical things like incomplete markets and incomplete contracts. Now, this slide lists a bunch of Nobel Prizes that have been awarded over the last 30 years for fundamental research on these problems. And the reason I mention these Nobel Prizes is simply to make the point that what I'm talking about today is not some strange Nick Barr or London School of Economics idiosyncratic ideas. It's rooted in the very best of modern economics. And I'm going to illustrate by looking at two examples. First of all, imperfect information. In many areas of social policy, the assumption that consumers are rational and well-informed doesn't hold. In the context of pensions, there was a survey of Americans, and 50% of them didn't know the difference between a stock and a bond. And at this stage, I look at my LSE students and I say, put up your hand if you're really sure that you know the difference. And about 30% of hands go up. And another 30% sort of go up. Now, if graduate students at the London School of Economics aren't absolutely sure about something as basic as that, then assuming that the general public knows about it is simply nonsense. Most people don't need to shift from equities to bonds as they approach retirement, and few people understand the importance of administrative costs. The one piece of pensions advice I give to people is look at the administrative charges that your provider imposes on you. A charge of 1% per year of your accumulation, which doesn't sound like much, means that over a full career, your accumulation will be 20% smaller just because of that charge, and hence your pension will be 20% smaller. So imperfect information is a major problem. Financial literacy is shockingly limited. I've got an example. This is from an international survey. I will come back to that in Q&A if you're interested. But it makes the point that financial literacy is very, very limited. Financial education in schools is enormously important. It won't turn people into pension sophisticates. Education about health and diet and lifestyle is enormously important. It doesn't turn us into medical doctors. So one shouldn't exaggerate the importance of how far financial education can take you. Non-rational behavior. Well, I can really skip over these slides because you've heard all about it. You know that people suffer from present bias. They know they ought to save for old age, but they don't save for old age. Also, because it's very complicated, where they do save, they make a lot of mistakes in the way that they do so. And I'll just make that as a statement, and we can come back to it in Q&A. Now, it actually gets worse. The problem is not only people who don't understand or don't have the willpower to save. There are people who do know enough, but don't actually look after their pension affairs very well. And on the book I'm currently working with Peter Diamond, there's a sentence that says, many people don't review their pension arrangements often enough. And then there's a footnote, and it says, this is true of both of the authors of this book. I have better things to do than look after my pension arrangements, like talking to the Global Pensions Programme or spending time with grandchildren or going to the cricket. So the assumption of rational behaviour doesn't hold water in practice. It's great theory. It's not the way the world works. So let me now come on to some strategic policy directions. I said at the start, no single best pension system for all countries. So I'm not saying that any of these are the best policy and your country is crazy if you don't do it. I'm merely saying, looking towards the future, looking at current trends, looking at what comes possible, these are interesting examples to know about. So let me start off with non-contributory pensions. I mentioned those briefly yesterday, in the panel yesterday afternoon. Whoops. In 1950, in the OECD countries, husbands earned the money, women were the caregivers, men had long-term full-time contracts. That was more or less true then. It's no longer true. It never was true in developing countries. You've got today greater diversity of labor market relations. People can be employed or self-employed or outside the labor force. They can work full-time or part-time or be in the gig economy or with zero-hour contracts, long-term or short-term, formal or informal. And what's more, you've got more dynamic movement across these different labor market relations. And what that means is that basing a pension contributions record via collecting contributions via people's employer, which worked well in the OECD countries in the middle of the last century, no longer works there as well as it did. And in developing countries, there's always and continues to be the problem of informality. So coverage problems for contributory benefits linked to a worker's employment status are a challenge. One policy direction for that is non-contributory pensions, a flat rate tax-financed pension based on age and residence. Country examples include Australia, Canada, Chile, the Netherlands, New Zealand, and an increasing number of developing countries. Some countries like Holland give everybody the full basic pension, so it's just based on age and residence. Other countries pay a lower non-contributory pension for people with higher incomes or higher pensions. That's a design issue, but the key point is that there is a non-contributory base to the pension system. Advantages, well, from the point of view of the Social Security Minister, if that's where you're from, non-contributory pensions strengthen coverage, adequacy, and gender balance. They share risk with taxpayers, hence with current and future generations. They can fit different budget envelopes. And as I've mentioned, there's a considerable gain in gender balance. The view from the Ministry of Finance is that you can control how much you spend on these things. Obviously, one variable is the level of the monthly benefit you pay, but a powerful variable is the age from which you pay it. When Peter Diamond and I were advising the government of China to introduce a non-contributory pension, we said it should be pitched as close to the poverty line as possible. It should be generous. If that means you can't afford that at age 60, then start paying it from age 65 or 70. And I've got a link in the PowerPoint to a piece I wrote for the World Bank's Jobs and Development blog. So that's the first policy direction. The second one, the one that I foreshadowed at the start, is increasing the size and effectiveness of the labor force. And here I give the generic ways that I talked about in the earlier slide to unpack those. How do you increase the number of workers? Well, there's a labor market agenda that includes improved matching of workers and jobs. Historically, everyone worked in agriculture. The matching problem was simply people needed muscles. Today, obviously, the matching problem is much more complicated, given the changing nature of work, given labor mobility across different types of jobs, across geographical areas, and particularly as technology advances. So what a worker does will change. A letter from the head teacher of our local primary school to local parents that went to the parents of our grandchildren said, remember it said, 50% of the jobs that your children will fill haven't been invented yet. So it's a very dynamic situation. And so there's an ongoing labour market agenda. There's obviously gender aspects as well, including improved alignment of paid work and family responsibilities, including much better access to childcare in terms of quality, affordability, location, open hours, etc. And then also policies for facilitating labour market activities by older workers, including options for flexible retirement. And if I have time, I want to come back to that. Increasing the number of workers also has a health aspect, an education aspect. There's the pensions agenda for later and more flexible retirement, and there's a wider agenda for managed migration. Now, I don't have time to talk about all of those. I merely want to make the point that the policies you need to increase the number of workers go across a whole range of government ministries. This is not just a social security issue, it's a labour market, education and health issue as well. So very briefly, here's a puzzle. In the old days, people at age 65 were very old and very frail, and it was right that they were forced to retire because they were lowering the productivity of younger workers. Since then, two things have happened. People are living longer, healthy lives, which means they should be working longer. But also, societies have become richer, which means we can afford to give people a period of leisure at the end of their working life. So that means pensions are now a social device for dividing adult life between working years and retirement years. And that means it makes sense to give people a choice of how they move from full-time work to full retirement. And everybody agrees this is a great idea. Universal agreement. But it hasn't happened. Why? And I want to talk a bit about that. It's not just age discrimination. It's more than that. There's a bunch of impediments. First of all, there are things that stop individuals from working longer. If a worker wants to retire at minimum pension age, and that's a well-informed choice, that's great. But they might retire then because they think that's the norm and don't realize they can make different choices. So attitudes to really matter. State pension age is an important signal to people about when to retire. But there's an underlying problem, which is we're all systematically badly informed about how old is old. Because when you ask how old is old, you think of your grandma, who was very old, but people are living longer, as we saw, so that somebody aged 70 who was very old 50 years ago is very much still in their prime today. So you've got attitudes, you've got labour market rigidities, in particular the lack of part-time options, you've got rigidities in pension design. If you pay someone a pension based on their final salary, that's death to part-time employment. If I move to half-time work and that halves my pension, clearly I'm not going to do that. There's a lack of ability to take some, but not all of your pension and take the rest of it later, which they have in Sweden and Norway. And there are other things that stop workers working longer. There are things that stop employers from hiring older workers. Age discrimination, I'm sure, does play a part, but it's a mistake to think that it's all age discrimination and workers don't hire older workers for that reason. Big impediment, a fixed cost of employment. If it costs you $4,000 in medical insurance per worker, you're going to have as few workers as possible and make them work very long hours. There's legal impediments to downshifting. In many countries, lowering a worker's wage if they move to something less productive is legally difficult and maybe impossible. Skills of older workers are an issue, and the health of older workers may be an issue or at least be perceived as some for some employers. So what do you do about it? I'm going to go through the slide very quickly. You can read about it afterwards. Policies to change attitudes are important. Policies to encourage older workers to continue by giving them access to training, by facilitating labour market activity by older workers. BMW in Germany have exoskeletons. So if I'm an older worker and I'm meant to be lifting an engine up into a car bonnet, I've got mechanical assistance to make it easier, rather like power-assisted steering in a car. Avoid a pension penalty if people continue part-time work, and allow people to take some, but not all, of their pensions. What do you do to help employers facilitate them hiring older workers? Deal with age discrimination by enforcing the law, avoiding fixed costs of employment, reviewing employment law to make it easier to strike contracts with workers who want to move to part-time work or to downshift to less stressful work. And if health is an issue, then consider paying some sort of subsidy to employers of older workers to recognize that. So, increasing the number of workers, I've talked about. Next strategic direction, increasing saving and investment. This is a repeat of the earlier slide. If you've got fewer workers, make each of them more productive by investing in their human and physical capital. Now, that means more saving. If you want to invest more in labour, you need to finance that investment by having more savings. How do you do that? Well, individual funded pension accounts, as in Chile, are one way. They're a well-known way. They are not the only way. Within the pension system, you can have the Chile model, or you can have simpler individual accounts of a sort that I'm going to talk about in a minute. You can have fully funded industry plans, as in the Netherlands. You can have partially funded national systems, as in Sweden and Canada. Or you can have more savings outside the pension fund, for example, the Norway Sovereign Wealth Fund. Now, of these different ways of saving, I'm going to focus on two because both are fairly new. One is in the United Kingdom, the National Employment Savings Trust, Nest Pensions, and the other is a risk-sharing defined benefit plan in New Brunswick. So, I've argued that the model of choice and competition is the wrong model. Choice has high administrative costs. Consumers don't do a good job of choosing. What does that tell us in practice about how you design pensions? Well, first of all, you should make pension contributions mandatory or use automatic enrollment. Secondly, keep choices simple. If people want to make choices about pensions and retirement, a good system will help them make that choices, but, and this is critical, a good pension system should work well also for workers who make no choice. So 2, keep choices simple. 3, include a good default option which moves people from equities to bonds as they age. And 4, keep administrative costs low by separating 2 bits of the puzzle. One part is the record keeping, the administrative stuff, the back office stuff. That should be centralized because there's economies of scale. The fund management, who decides what investment to make with worker savings, that should be outsourced to the private sector, either on a wholesale basis or through some sort of sovereign wealth fund. One example of this sort of design is the US Thrift Savings Plan for US federal civil servants. A more recent one is UK Nest Pensions, which is similar to the design of the thrift savings plan for similar reasons. And it has been phased in since 2012, so there's possible useful lessons about how you phase in a new plan. Key features. Now, my country gives the world a lot of really good examples of how not to manage pensions. But this is a rare example of where we've got it right. If a country wants individual funded accounts, this is the way to do it. The design of Nest is based explicitly on the findings of behavioral economics. It's got 4 key elements: automatic enrollment, limited choice, centralized account administration, and wholesale fund management. And in order to make sure there is time for Q&A, there are slides here on how the system works. I will skip over most of them. Workers are automatically enrolled in the default fund. If they want to make a choice, they can choose from 5 funds. There's a higher risk fund, a lower risk fund, an ethical fund, a Sharia fund, and a pre-retirement fund. Centralized account administration, charges, there's an annual management charge of 0.3%, so that's very low. There is temporarily an additional charge to cover the setup costs of Nest, because it was set up with a loan from the British government, and to create a level playing field with private providers, it was thought that that loan should be repaid. But long-term administrative charge is 0.3%. Performance good. Nest builds in, or is experimenting with, a rainy day fund. In other words, where most of your money goes into savings that you can't access till pension age, but some of it is available for short-term liquidity purposes. And at the moment, it's just being experimented with. As you've heard from other speakers, this is a terrific idea, and I'm delighted that Nest is doing that. So what's good about this plan? Well, it respects the lessons from the economics of information and behavioral economics. It simplifies choices for workers. It keeps administrative costs low. It can incorporate a liquid element, etc. So let me now come on to risk-sharing designs. The bottom line is that in a defined contribution plan, all risk falls on the individual. In a defined benefit plan, all risk falls on the firm or industry that's sponsoring the plan. And those are what economists call corner solutions. In other words, all risk one side or all risk the other. And a better solution is to share risk more widely. And I've got some slides that go through a spectrum of different degrees of risk, but I'm going to skip over those. You can read about them for yourselves, because I want to talk about a practical design. And this is a risk-sharing defined benefit plan along the lines of the Canadian province of New Brunswick. The thing starts from 2 elements. It starts from credible, independent, technically high-quality projections at agreed intervals using an agreed methodology of the health of their public service pension plan. So you get trusted, accurate projections. Secondly, there are rules agreed in advance of what will happen if there's a deficit. And if there is a projected deficit, then the levers that can be adjusted are higher employer contributions, higher worker contributions, a lower accrual rate of future benefits, lower indexation of pensions in payment, or any mix of those. And the rules specify in advance which of those come in, how quickly, in what order, and to what extent. And so that's all agreed in advance, and it was an agreement between the trade unions, the employers, and the provincial government. And that's a very simple account of a sophisticated plan, but it makes the point that you can design a DB plan in which not all risk falls on the plan sponsor. And a crucial variant in that is, if you go through this list, are employers involved if there's a deficit? If employers are not involved, if any adjustment is through worker contributions, accrual rates, and pensions in payment, then all the risk falls on the plan members, and this is a collective defined contribution pension. If employers are on the hook a bit as well, then you've got a conditional defined benefit plan, which is also, we heard yesterday from the speaker from Iceland, is also called a defined ambition plan. So, right, let me wind up with some key takeaways. First of all, the theoretical ones, and then I'll come on to the policy ones. Increased saving and investment are rational responses to population aging, but they need to be implemented with care. And the key point is saving not for their own sake, but investment in productive assets that raises the size of the economy in future so that there are more resources, amongst other things, to pay pensions. Secondly, choice and competition is the wrong model for pensions. Thirdly, individual accounts are one way to organize saving. But first of all, if you do have them, they should be designed to avoid facing workers with complex choices. And secondly, there are other ways of organizing saving. Fourth, there's no magic bullets. Finally, and this sometimes surprises people, people sometimes say to me, what is it that matters most about pensions? And I say, it's actually not pension design. It's two things. It's good government and output growth. And as we were walking to a restaurant last night after dinner, somebody from Bilbao was walking us through and was explaining the remarkable development of Bilbao over the last 30 years, from a place that was rather grey and industrial into the fabulous city it is today. And I was pressing him and saying, how come this happened? What could other cities learn? And the conclusion we came to was a rather sad one. The reason it occurred was good government in the Basque Country, which is terrific for the Basque Country, but how you get good government is one of the great unanswered questions. Final slide, policy takeaways. Look at the wider picture. There's multiple objectives, multiple parts of a pension system, wider aspects like medical insurance is clearly part of the system of protecting elderly people. Secondly, take a realistic view of individual behavior, in particular, avoid excessive reliance on well-informed consumer choice. Third, if you're proposing a change, make sure you look at the costs of that change, not just the benefit. Any move towards funding has significant fiscal costs. And finally, and you probably don't need this message, but academics do, respect implementation constraints. Politics matters, technical expertise matters, administrative costs matter. So I've stuck some further reading at the end. Let me leave it there so that there's time for Q&A, which is always the bit that I enjoy most. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I am not sure, are we short in time? Okay, so I'll open the floor to, si alguien tiene alguna pregunta. Yo he tenido la oportunidad de poder hablar muchas veces con Nick, si alguien quiere preguntarle, si no, le sigo preguntando yo. Tenemos una... Nick, no sé cómo hablar en español o en inglés. Hablar en español por... Okay, so Nick, I think we had the opportunity to talk many times about many of these issues, but it seems to me that one of the things that you're saying very forcefully is that we're going to have to work longer in many cases. How do you see that conversation happening all over the world, and particularly in many of our countries where we have retirement ages that are much lower than retirement ages in the developing world. We have retirement ages of 55, 60. How do you see that happening? And what are the lessons that more developed countries can transmit to kind of like younger countries that are beginning to walk this path?
Several lessons. One, work to change expectations that retirement age is fixed in tablets of stone for all time. Secondly, to the extent possible, announce changes a long time in advance to give people time to adjust. Third, tie pension age to life expectancy in some sensible way so that when it does start to rise, it rises gradually and predictably. And if it's tied to life expectancy in some automatic way, it means ministers don't have to make difficult and politically unpopular decisions all the time. Fourth, you can't just raise retirement age, you need to help workers. And I talked about some of the things you need to do in terms of education, in terms of training, in terms of access to healthcare, in terms of mechanical things to make physical tasks easier for older workers. But I would say it needs a complete strategy, and if you think that all it needs to do is to change a law in the national parliament, you know, that's not going to work. You need a lot more than that.
Excellent. So I think for me that was one of the main messages of that conversation, in the sense that the people are here seated are the pensions people, but they need to talk to the labor ministry people to understand that it's not only changing the retirement age, as you say, but it's also talking about what regulations will allow workers to work longer, how we can make that easier, how we can make that possible. So I think that is a very important message to take from here.
If someone were in some peculiar parallel universe to say, you are an absolute dictator of the pensions world and you can make only one change, but it can any change you like, I think I would say the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Labour and the Social Security Minister should all be next door to each other.
I don't know whether that would work in many countries, but yeah, we can try. But I think we're really short in time. It's a pleasure to have you here and obviously have conversations with you about this. So thank you so much, Nick, again, for coming every time that we called you, and it's a real pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you.
Let's give a round of applause.